A single request, whispered from a place of bone-deep exhaustion, should have been simple. For Avery Morgan, wedged into seat 34B, on a transatlantic red-eye, all she wanted was a pillow to quiet the screaming ache in her neck. But her simple request was met with a sneer, then open, cascading laughter from the flight crew. In front of hundreds of strangers, she was dismissed, ridiculed for her economy ticket. Humiliation burned her cheeks raw. She shrank into her seat, wishing she could disappear. But she didn't know that the flight's most powerful passenger had witnessed it all. And he was about to do something so shocking, so unprecedented, that the entire plane would fall into stunned silence, changing her life forever. The air in the economy cabin of Aura Airlines Flight 772 from New York to London was thick with the scent of recycled oxygen and quiet desperation. For Avery Morgan, it was the smell of failure. Every molecule felt like a judgment. She was a woman who was supposed to be in business class, not by birthright, but by the sheer force of will that had propelled her from a working-class background in Ohio to a promising career in sustainable architectural design in the heart of Manhattan. For the past 5 years, she had flown business. Her trips paid for by a firm that believed in her vision. But that firm was gone now. Her startup, Viridian Designs, which she had poured her life savings and every waking hour into, had just been rejected for its final round of funding. The sleek, eco-conscious models she'd presented to a board of stone-faced venture capitalists were now just expensive, heart-breaking paperweights in a storage unit. The flight home wasn't a triumphant return, it was a retreat. So here she was in seat 34B, a middle seat, the geographical and metaphorical center of anonymous misery. To her right, a large man was already snoring his shoulder, a formidable tweed-covered mountain range encroaching on her sliver of territory. To her left, a young woman typed furiously on a laptop, the frantic click-clack of the keys, a miniature jackhammer against Avery's frayed nerves. Exhaustion was a physical entity, a heavy cloak pressing down on her. She hadn't slept properly in a week, her mind a frantic hamster wheel of what-ifs and if-onlys. Her neck was a column of fire and knots. She'd given her own travel pillow to her mother last month after her mom's neck surgery, a small act of kindness she now desperately regretted. She watched the flight attendants move through the cabin with the practiced, weary grace of people on their 1000th journey. They were led by a senior flight attendant whose name tag read Brenda. Brenda Davies had the kind of severe, immaculately maintained glamour that bordered on intimidating. Her blonde hair was swept into a chignon, so tight it seemed to pull the corners of her eyes, giving her a look of perpetual sharp disapproval. Her lipstick was a slash of crimson, and her smile, when it rarely appeared, never reached her eyes. She moved with an air of absolute authority, her junior colleague, a younger woman named Tiffany, trailing in her wake like a nervous shadow. Avery waited for a lull in their beverage service. When Brenda passed her row, she raised a tentative hand. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice raspy from disuse. Brenda stopped, her painted-on smile tightening. "Yes." The word was clipped impatient. "I'm so sorry to bother you." Avery began, already feeling the familiar sting of apology for simply existing. "I was just wondering if there was any possibility I could get a pillow. My neck is really bothering me." Brenda's eyes did a slow, deliberate scan of Avery, from her simple non-designer sweater to her worn-out sneakers tucked under the seat in front of her. It was a practiced, humiliating appraisal designed to categorize and dismiss. Brenda then let out a short, sharp sound that was not quite a laugh, but worse, a scoff. She leaned in, not for intimacy, but to ensure Avery felt the full force of her condescension. "A pillow." She repeated her voice just loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. She turned her head slightly towards Tiffany, who was hovering nearby. "She wants a pillow." Tiffany giggled a nervous, high-pitched sound, quickly stifling it behind her hand when she saw Avery's expression. Brenda turned back to Avery, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "Honey pillows and blankets are complimentary, in premium economy and above, for passengers in your cabin." She gestured vaguely at the cramped seats. "They're available for purchase. If we have any left, that is." She paused for dramatic effect. "They're $25. The price was absurd, a clear exploitation, but it was the tone that cut Avery to the bone. The use of honey, the public announcement of her cabin's inadequacy, the clear implication that she couldn't afford it. Avery's face flushed a deep, painful red. "Oh, I didn't realize," she stammered, fumbling for her purse. "That's fine, I'll take one." Brenda's smile became a triumphant smirk. She straightened up and looked at Tiffany. "Check the forward galley, see if we have any of the economy comfort kits left." The way she said it made it sound like a biohazard bag. Tiffany scurried away. Brenda, however, lingered. She crossed her arms, looking down at Avery. "You know," she said, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper that carried further than a shout, "it pays to read the details of your ticket class. You get what you pay for, after all." And then it happened. The man in 34A, who had been pretending to read a magazine, snickered. The woman on the aisle in row 33 turned around and gave Avery a pitying look. A wave of quiet, second-hand embarrassment and cruel amusement rippled through the nearby seats. It was 1,000 tiny cuts. Avery felt her eyes prickle with hot tears of shame. She wanted to say something to defend herself, to scream that a month ago she could have bought the entire damn airline. But the words were stuck in her throat, choked by failure. Tiffany returned empty-handed. "Sorry, Brenda. We're all out. The last one was sold about an hour ago." "Oh, what a shame," Brenda said, her voice devoid of any actual sympathy. She gave Avery one last dismissive look. "Looks like you'll have to make do." She then turned on her heel and glided down the aisle a queen, leaving a peasant in her wake. Avery shrank into her seat, the world narrowing to the cheap, scratchy fabric beneath her. The laughter, both spoken and unspoken, echoed in her ears. She squeezed her eyes shut, a single tear tracing a hot path down her cold cheek. She had never felt so small, so utterly and completely alone. She wasn't just a failed entrepreneur. In that moment, she was the girl in 34B who was too poor and too unimportant to even merit a pillow. The 7-hour flight ahead of her stretched into an eternity of humiliation. Up in the serene, muted luxury of business class, Harrison Thorne adjusted the noise-cancelling headphones, but he wasn't listening to music. He was listening to the hum of the twin engines, a sound he knew as intimately as his own heartbeat. As the CEO of Aura Airlines, flying on his own fleet was not just transportation, it was infection. He rarely flew in the opulent first-class suites, preferring the anonymity and closer proximity to the main cabin that business class afforded. It was where he could observe, unnoticed, the real-time operation of the multi-billion-dollar company his father had built and he had transformed. His name, Harrison Thorne, was synonymous with a certain brand of ruthless modern innovation. He had taken Thorne Aviation, a respectable cargo and charter company, and launched Aura Airlines, a passenger carrier that had in a decade become a major player in the transatlantic market. He was known for his obsessive attention to detail, his unforgiving standards, and a public persona so private he was almost a myth. At 42, with sharp grey eyes and a stillness that unnerved his competitors, he was one of the most powerful and invisible men in the industry. He was returning from a tense negotiation in New York, a deal that would expand Aura's fleet by 100 new aircraft. He was tired, but his mind never switched off. He decided to stretch his legs, a common habit of his on long flights. He liked to walk the length of the plane, a silent, ghost-like audit of his domain. He'd nod at the crew, observe the cleanliness of the galleys, and gauge the mood of the passengers. As he passed through the curtain, separating premium economy from the main cabin, the atmosphere shifted. The air became more compressed, the quiet hum of the journey replaced by a denser, more populated reality. And that's when he saw it. He was standing near the rear galley, out of the direct sight line of the main aisle, when he saw the senior flight attendant, Brenda, speaking to a passenger in a middle seat. He recognized Brenda. She'd been with the airline for 15 years. A veteran. Dependable, he'd thought. He couldn't hear the initial request, but he saw the passenger, a woman with weary, intelligent eyes and hair the color of warm honey pulled back into a simple ponytail. He saw the hope in her posture, and then he saw it curdle into humiliation. He heard Brenda's voice, laced with a saccharine poison he knew all too well. Honey pillows and blankets are complimentary, in premium economy and above. Harrison froze. Every word was a violation of the ethos he had painstakingly tried to build. Aura's slogan wasn't just marketing copy. It was supposed to be a mission statement. Every passenger elevated. He heard the absurd price. He heard the dismissive tone. He saw the junior flight attendant's nervous giggle. But the thing that made his blood run cold was the ripple of snickers from the surrounding passengers. His employee had not just denied a service. She had orchestrated a public shaming. She had used the uniform he provided as a tool of casual cruelty. She had made his airline, his name, a stage for bullying. Anger, cold and precise, settled in his chest. He could have walked over, pulled her aside, and fired her on the spot. But that wouldn't undo the damage. It wouldn't erase the humiliation burned onto that woman's face. It wouldn't admonish the passengers who had laughed. Public humiliation required public vindication. He saw the woman, Avery, shrink into her seat. He saw the tear escape and trace a path down her cheek, and in that moment, a decision audacious and absolute formed in his mind. It was a move so far outside the corporate playbook, it was practically on another continent. It was theatrical, it was extreme, and it was exactly what the situation demanded. He turned and strode back towards the front of the plane, his long legs covering the distance with a speed that made other passengers turn and look. He didn't stop at his seat. He walked right past the galley, past the astonished looks of the flight attendants, preparing for their break, and straight to the cockpit door. He knocked once, a sharp, authoritative rap. The door opened a crack, and the co-pilot's eyes widened. "Mr. Thorne, sir, is everything all right? Everything is fine, David," Harrison said, his voice calm but with an undeniable edge of command. "I need to use the intercom, now." The co-pilot, a man named David Chen, simply nodded and stepped back. He knew better than to question a direct order from the man who signed his paychecks. Harrison stepped inside the cockpit, the flight deck glowing with the myriad lights of the instrument panel. The captain, a veteran named George Bell, turned in his seat, his expression one of complete surprise. "Harrison, what's going on?" "A breach of protocol, George, a serious one." Harrison said, his eyes fixed on the small black handset of the public address system. "I'm handling it." He lifted the receiver. He pressed the button, and the familiar two-toned chime echoed through every corner of the aircraft, from the first-class suites to the last row of economy. A hush fell over the cabin. Every passenger, including Avery, who was still lost in her misery, looked up towards the speakers. Harrison brought the receiver to his lips. He didn't need to think about what to say. The words were already there, forged in the fire of his anger. His voice, deep and clear and amplified throughout the entire plane, was unmistakable. It held a power that no flight attendant or captain could ever command. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Harrison Thorne, CEO of Aura Airlines, speaking from the flight deck." A collective gasp went through the cabin. Passengers looked at each other bewildered. In seat 34B, Avery's head shot up, her eyes wide with confusion. In the aisle, Brenda Davies froze mid-step, her crimson-lipped mouth falling open. Harrison continued his voice perfectly, even, yet carrying a weight that pinned everyone to their seats. "I need to make a brief announcement regarding a service issue. It has come to my attention that a member of my staff in the main cabin has just refused a simple request for a pillow, and in the process caused a great deal of embarrassment to a passenger." Brenda's face went from pale to ghostly white. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This couldn't be happening. Harrison's voice dropped, slightly becoming more personal, more direct, and infinitely more devastating. "So I would like to clarify something for my crew, and for everyone on board this aircraft. The passenger in seat 34B, Ms. Avery Morgan." He paused, letting her name hang in the air, a name he'd read from the manifest before his walk. "She can have anything she wants. Any comfort item, any meal from any cabin, any assistance she requires for the remainder of this flight, and any future flight she takes with us." He let that sink in for a beat. The entire plane was silent, holding its breath. And then he delivered the final life-altering blow. "Because you see, it appears there has been a terrible misunderstanding on the part of my staff. That woman is my wife." Silence. It wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a thick, heavy blanket of pure, unadulterated shock that smothered the entire aircraft. Every whisper, every cough, every rustle of a magazine ceased. 250 passengers and a dozen crew members were collectively paralyzed, their minds, trying to process the impossible words that had just echoed from the speakers. In seat 34B, Avery Morgan felt as if the air had been vacuumed from her lungs. "My wife." The two words replayed in her mind, nonsensical and bizarre. She thought she was hallucinating, that the exhaustion and humiliation had finally caused her brain to snap. She looked around, her eyes wide and frantic. The man who had been snoring next to her was now sitting bolt upright, staring at her with an expression of awe and terror. The woman with the laptop had slammed it shut and was peering at her over the top of the seat. Everyone was looking at her, not with pity or amusement now, but with a stunned, fearful reverence. Brenda Davies stood frozen in the aisle, the color completely drained from her face, leaving her crimson lipstick looking like a bloody gash on a corpse. Her mind was a maelstrom of denial and panic. The CEO, on her flight, witnessing that. And the woman, his wife, flying in economy. It made no sense yet. The voice, that calm, authoritative, terrifying voice, was undeniably Harrison Thorne's. Her career, which she had so carefully constructed on a foundation of seniority and intimidation, was not just over, it was about to be nuked from orbit. Before anyone could fully recover, the cockpit door opened, and Harrison Thorne emerged. He handed the intercom receiver back to the dumbfounded co-pilot and strode back into the cabin. He moved with the same determined purpose as before, But now his path was cleared by a wave of silent, parting passengers. No one dared meet his gaze. He didn't even glance at Brenda as he passed her. She was in that moment beneath his notice. His focus was entirely on seat 34B. Avery watched him approach, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his presence commanding in a way that felt almost gravitational. When he stopped at her row, he had to crouch slightly to look at her, his sharp grey eyes softening with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. It looked like an apology. "Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice, now a quiet, low rumble, meant only for her. "Avery, I am so incredibly sorry for what you just endured and for the shock of my unconventional solution." Avery could only shake her head, speechless. Words were still a foreign concept. The man in seat 34C, the snoring mountain, was practically trying to merge with the window to give them space. Harrison ignored him. "There is a seat for you in first class." He continued, his voice gentle but firm. "I would consider it a personal favor if you would allow me to escort you there. Please." It wasn't a request. It was a lifeline. Avery looked at the faces around her, at the suffocating attention, and knew she couldn't stay here for another second. She fumbled for her bag under the seat, her hands shaking. Harrison noticed her struggle. He reached down his large hand, easily retrieving her worn leather satchel. "Allow me," he said. He then straightened up and offered her his hand. Hesitantly, she placed her small, trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and steady, a solid anchor in her sea of confusion. As he helped her stand and guided her into the aisle, the spell broke. A wave of frantic whispering erupted through the cabin. "Oh my God, it is him! His wife in economy. What's that about? That flight attendant, she is so fired!" As Harrison led Avery towards the front of the plane, he finally stopped and turned to the still paralyzed Brenda. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The icy calm was far more terrifying. "It's Davies," he said, the name dropping like a shard of ice into the silence. "You and I will have a conversation when we land. Until then, I suggest you confine yourself to the rear galley. Your junior colleague can handle the cabin. Do you understand me?" Brenda could only manage a jerky, spastic nod, her eyes wide with pure fear. She looked like she might be physically sick. She stumbled backwards, turning and practically fleeing down the aisle. Harrison then guided Avery through the curtain into the hushed, spacious sanctuary of the first-class cabin. The atmosphere was a world away. The seats were individual pods, upholstered in cream-colored leather. The lighting was soft and ambient. A flight attendant, a kind-faced man in his 50s, approached them with a look of utter bewilderment. "Mr. Thorne, sir. And ma'am." He was clearly at a loss for what to call her. "This is Ms. Morgan," Harrison said smoothly, releasing Avery's hand as he gestured to the most private suite at the very front. "She'll be taking seat 1A. Please get her anything she needs. A blanket, a pillow, a glass of whatever she'd like to drink. On my personal account." "Of course, sir. Immediately." The flight attendant scurried off, eager to please. Harrison turned back to Avery, who was now standing awkwardly beside the palatial seat, her worn satchel looking wildly out of place. "Please," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I owe you a massive explanation." Avery finally found her voice, though it was barely a whisper. You don't know me. Why would you say that I'm your wife?" Harrison let out a long, slow breath, a hint of weariness touching his features for the first time. He took the seat opposite her. "Because," he said, looking her directly in the eye, "it was the fastest, most effective way to restore your dignity. If I had simply identified myself and reprimanded her, you would have become the woman the CEO stood up for. A curiosity, an object of pity and speculation for the rest of the flight. They would have whispered about you." He leaned forward slightly. "But by claiming you as my wife, I didn't just give you status. I transferred the shame. Instantly. Every person on this plane who laughed at you is now terrified of you. They are ashamed of themselves. And that flight attendant," he said with a grim finality, "is not just worried about her job. She is worried about what my wife will say to me when we get home. It was a power play, Ms. Morgan. A ruthless one. And I used you as a piece on the board without your consent. For that, I am truly sorry. But I saw her make you cry, and I reacted." Avery stared at him, the logic of his extreme action slowly dawning on her. It was strategic, brilliant, and utterly terrifying in its efficiency. He hadn't just saved her. He had avenged her in the most public way imaginable. The flight attendant returned with a fluffy down pillow and a soft cashmere blanket, placing them on her seat as if they were royal artifacts. "Ma'am, can I get you some champagne, or perhaps some tea?" Avery looked at the pillow, the simple object that had started this entire nightmare. She sank into the plush leather seat, which felt more like a throne than a chair, and pulled the blanket over her lap. The comfort was so profound, so absolute, it almost made her want to weep again, but for an entirely different reason. She looked up at the powerful, enigmatic man sitting across from her. "Tea," she said, her voice a little stronger now. "Tea would be lovely. And Harrison." "Yes, thank you," she said, the words full of a sincerity that resonated in the quiet cabin. "And please, call me Avery." As the flight attendant poured jasmine tea into delicate porcelain cups, a fragile sense of normalcy began to settle in the first-class suite. The ambient roar of the engines was a distant, soothing hum. The chaos of the economy cabin felt 1,000,000 miles away. Avery wrapped her hands around the warm cup, the simple act grounding her in this surreal new reality. Harrison Thorne watched her, his expression unreadable. He had orchestrated this grand, dramatic gesture, and now he seemed content to sit in silence, allowing her the space to recover. But Avery's mind, no longer consumed by humiliation, was buzzing with questions. "You knew my name," she said, breaking the quiet. "On the intercom you said Avery Morgan. How—" A flicker of something not quite a smile, but a softening of his stern features appeared. "When I decided to intervene, I walked back to the galley and asked the purser for the passenger manifest for seat 34B. I'm the CEO. Data is my primary tool. Of course, it was that simple, that clinical. It was a reminder of the immense power he wielded so effortlessly. And you're really the CEO," she stated, the fact still sinking in. "I've heard of Aura Airlines, obviously. I've never heard of Harrison Thorne." "That's by design," he replied, taking a sip of his own drink, a simple black coffee. "I prefer the company to have the spotlight, not the person running it. It's less of a distraction." They fell into a comfortable silence for a few moments, the plane cruising steadily through the dark sky. To make conversation to feel like a person again, and not just a project he had saved, Avery decided to talk about her own life, or what was left of it. "I was in New York for a business pitch," she said, a shadow crossing her face, "for my architectural design firm. It didn't go well. This whole trip is, The epilogue to a failed chapter. Harrison leaned forward, a genuine spark of interest in his eyes. Architectural design. What kind? Sustainable design. She answered, her passion momentarily overriding her gloom. Green buildings, living walls, integrated water reclamation systems, creating spaces that work with the environment, not against it. My company was called Viridian Designs. She expected a polite nod, a generic, "That's interesting." Instead, Harrison's brow furrowed in concentration, as if he was trying to place the name. "I've always been fascinated by it," Avery continued, feeling more at ease. "My father was an engineer, a brilliant one. He taught me that the most elegant solution is always the most efficient one, a lesson that applies to buildings as much as it does to machines." "What was his name?" Harrison asked, his voice suddenly sharp, with more than just curiosity. "Robert Morgan," Avery said. "He worked for a big industrial manufacturing company in Ohio for over 30 years, a place called Thorn Industries. He helped design a revolutionary new type of turbine engine for them in the late 90s. It was his life's work." The porcelain cup in Harrison Thorne's hand stilled. His knuckles went white. He stared at Avery, but his gaze seemed to be looking right through her into the past. The air in the suite grew thick with unspoken history. "Thorn Industries," he repeated, his voice a low, stunned whisper. "Robert Morgan. Bob Morgan." Avery's heart skipped a beat. "Yes," she breathed. "Everyone called him Bob. How could you possibly know that?" Harrison leaned back in his seat, the formidable CEO persona dissolving before her eyes, replaced by something much younger, much more vulnerable. A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips, but it was tinged with a deep, profound sadness. "Thorn Industries was my father's company," he said quietly. "It was the foundation of everything. Before Aura Airlines, before all of this, there was just a factory in Ohio, making engines and machine parts. My father was Arthur Thorne." Avery felt a dizzying sense of vertigo, as if the plane had suddenly dropped 1,000 feet. Arthur Thorne, the legendary gruff founder. Her father had spoken of him with a mixture of awe and frustration. A demanding genius, he'd called him. "I spent my summers there as a teenager," Harrison continued, his voice distant. "My father insisted. I wasn't the heir apparent. I was the glorified summer intern. I fetched coffee, I made blueprints, and I tried to stay out of the way of the real engineers. Men like your father." He looked at Avery, and for the first time she saw a genuine, unguarded emotion in his eyes, recognition. "I remember him. Bob Morgan. He was quiet, had a brilliant mind. He always had coffee stains on his schematics and a pencil behind his ear. He was kind to the clueless owner's son, who asked too many questions. He once spent 2 hours explaining the principles of gyroscopic precession to me using a bicycle wheel he'd brought from home." Harrison shook his head slowly, lost in the memory. "He was the best engineer we ever had. The turbine he designed. That technology is still a core component in our cargo fleet's engines today. His work paid for the first plane I ever bought for Aura." The revelation hit Avery with the force of a physical blow. Her father, who had passed away 5 years ago, had never truly known the impact of his work. He had been laid off during a restructuring when Thorn Industries was sold off to fund the airline's expansion, a bitter pill he had swallowed with quiet dignity. He had died, thinking he was just another cog in a machine that had eventually discarded him. And now his legacy was sitting across from her, the CEO of an airline that was in a way built upon his genius. "My God!" she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. But this time, they weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of a complex, heart-breaking pride. "Avery," Harrison said, his voice soft with an emotion she now understood as empathy. "When I saw you in that seat, I didn't know who you were. I just saw someone being treated unfairly, and it offended my sense of order. But now—" He trailed off, looking at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "Now this feels different." The random act of a powerful CEO saving a stranger was one thing. This was another. This was the son of the man who owned the company her father had dedicated his life to. The intercom announcement, the grand gesture, suddenly felt less like a corporate power play, and more like the universe closing a circle, righting a historical wrong in the most bizarre way imaginable. He hadn't just saved a passenger. Unknowingly, Harrison Thorne had come to the defense of Bob Morgan's daughter. The anonymity was gone. She wasn't just Avery Morgan, the failed entrepreneur. She was the daughter of the man whose forgotten work was woven into the very fabric of his success. And in the quiet hum of the first-class cabin, 37,000 feet over the Atlantic, two legacies intertwined by a shared past, they never knew they had collided. The descent into London Heathrow was smooth, the city lights a glittering carpet below. For most passengers, it signaled the end of a journey. For Brenda Davies, it was the countdown to her professional execution. She had spent the last 4 hours sequestered in the rear galley, a pariah amongst her own crew. Tiffany had avoided her, her face a mask of fear and pity. The other flight attendants moved around her with a wide berth, as if her career implosion was contagious. Every chime of the seatbelt sign was a toll of the bell for her. As the plane taxied to the gate, a sense of finality settled over the aircraft. Harrison had remained with Avery in first class, their conversation flowing easily, now filled with shared memories of Ohio and stories of their respective fathers. A bond forged in the crucible of that bizarre mid-air drama had formed between them. When the aircraft docked and the engines powered down, Harrison stood up. "If you'll excuse me for a moment, Avery," he said, his voice once again holding the cool edge of the CEO. "There's some ground maintenance I need to attend to personally." He walked to the main cabin door, where the ground staff was waiting. He spoke quietly to the gate supervisor, a man named Martin, who nodded grimly. Harrison then turned his gaze down the aisle, his eyes landing on Brenda, who was standing stiffly by her station, her face a pallid, sweating mess. "Ms. Davies," Harrison called out, his voice cutting through the rustle of passengers gathering their belongings. "My office, now!" He didn't mean his office back at corporate headquarters. He gestured toward the jet bridge, where Martin, the supervisor, and 2 members of airport security were now waiting discreetly. It was to be an immediate summary judgment. Brenda's legs felt like lead. She walked the length of the aisle in a daze past the curious, staring eyes of the passengers she had served for years. The whispers followed her like a plague. As she stepped into the jet bridge, the main door of the aircraft was held open, but Martin blocked her path towards the terminal. Harrison was there, standing with his arms crossed. He had not invited her into a private room. He was doing this right here, in this sterile, transient space, a symbolic no-man's land between her job and her unemployment. "Brenda," he began, dropping the formal Ms. Davies, a sign that all professional courtesy was now gone. "You have been with this company for 15 years. You have completed over 3,000 flights. You have been trained repeatedly on our core values. Can you tell me what our primary slogan is? Brenda stared at him, her mind blank with terror. I don't. Every passenger elevated, Harrison supplied, his voice dangerously soft. It's on your uniform. It's on the boarding pass. It's on the safety card you've handled thousands of times. It is the single most important promise we make to the people who pay our salaries. And tonight you took that promise and you ground it into the dirt. He took a step closer. You didn't just deny a passenger a pillow. You orchestrated a public humiliation. You used your authority, the authority I give you, to bully a woman who did nothing more than make a polite request. You fostered an environment where other passengers felt comfortable laughing at her expense. You are not just a bad employee, Brenda. You are a cancer in the culture I am trying to build. Tears began to stream down Brenda's face, smearing her carefully applied mascara. Thorne, please, she begged, her voice cracking. It was a mistake, a moment of stress. I'm so sorry. I can apologize to her. Apologize. Harrison's laugh was a short, bitter sound. An apology is for bumping someone in the aisle. What you did was a fundamental betrayal of your duties, and it's not about her anymore. She's fine. I've seen to that. This is about you and the standard you have failed to meet. He gestured to the supervisor, Martin. Martin, I want Ms. Davies's company ID and all access credentials. She is suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation into her conduct. Suspended? Brenda choked out the word, a sliver of desperate hope in her voice. Harrison's eyes were like chips of ice. Pending investigation is a corporate formality, Brenda. You and I both know what the outcome will be. You will not set foot on an Aura Airlines aircraft as an employee ever again. He then turned his attention to Tiffany, the junior flight attendant, who had been summoned and was now standing by the door, trembling. And you? Harrison said, his voice still stern but lacking the utter finality it had with Brenda. You stood by. You giggled. You were complicit. The only reason you're not joining Ms. Davies is because you're young and you were following a senior's lead. This is your one and only warning. You will be reassigned to domestic routes and will undergo a mandatory 3-month customer service retraining program. If I ever hear your name in connection with an incident like this again, you won't even get the formality of a suspension. Am I clear? Yes, sir. Crystal clear, sir. Thank you, sir. Tiffany sobbed, overcome with a mixture of terror and relief. Harrison gave her one last hard look before turning his back on them both. He walked back onto the plane, leaving Martin and the security personnel to handle the grim administrative task of stripping Brenda of her identity as a flight attendant. As passengers deplaned, they saw the weeping senior attendant handing over her badge, her face a ruin of makeup and despair. The karma was instant, brutal, and public. It was a powerful message to every employee who witnessed it. The culture of respect at Aura Airlines was not a suggestion. It was a law, and its CEO was also its chief enforcement officer. Harrison re-entered the first-class cabin to find Avery waiting, her face etched with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Is it over? She asked quietly. It's over for her. Harrison confirmed, his demeanor softening as he looked at her. Now let's get you home. I believe we have a lot more to talk about. He picked up her bag and his own, gesturing for her to precede him off the plane, away from the wreckage of the career that had just ended because of a simple request for a pillow. In the 48 hours after Flight 772 landed, the story of the CEO's wife and the shamed flight attendant became a legend within Aura Airlines. It was whispered in break rooms, discussed in pilot lounges, and debated in corporate offices from London to Los Angeles. But for Harrison Thorne, the incident was far from closed. His pending investigation was not a formality. It was a deep dive. He didn't just want Brenda Davies fired. He wanted to understand how a rot like that could fester in his company for 15 years. He tasked his head of corporate security, a formidable ex-MI6 agent named Paul Fletcher, with the investigation. "I don't want just her file, Paul," Harrison had instructed. "I want to know everything. Her financials, her performance, reviews, her crew complaints. Dig." Paul Fletcher was a man who enjoyed digging. What he unearthed was far more than just a case of a surly employee with a power trip. Brenda Davies wasn't just a bully. She was a sophisticated grifter. The first red flag was the sheer number of paid comfort kit transactions on flights under her supervision, far exceeding the fleet average. Paul's team cross-referenced these transactions with passenger complaints. They found a distinct pattern. Dozens of passengers over the years had filed minor complaints about being aggressively upsold on items that should have been free, or being charged exorbitant prices for things like pillows, eye masks, and even specific snacks from the premium cabins. These complaints had always been resolved with a simple apology and a voucher dismissed as isolated incidents by mid-level managers who failed to see the larger picture. But Paul's team connected the dots. They pulled the inventory logs for the galleys on Brenda's recent flights. She consistently reported high numbers of comfort kits being sold, yet the revenue deposited after the flight rarely matched the number of kits missing from inventory. She was pocketing the cash. The $25 she quoted Avery wasn't a company price. It was her price, pure profit, laundered through the chaos of a transatlantic flight. The deeper they dug, the uglier it got. They discovered a side business. Brenda was using a contact at the airline's laundry service contractor to acquire extra sets of premium cabin duvets and amenity kits, the high-end ones with designer cosmetics. She was then selling these items on eBay and other online marketplaces under a pseudonym. She had built a small but lucrative enterprise by stealing from her employer and its most valued customers. The final piece of the puzzle came from interviewing other crew members who were now, with Brenda gone, suddenly willing to talk. They spoke of a culture of fear she cultivated. She would trade favorable schedules and route assignments for a cut of their duty-free commissions. She would fake overtime slips for her favored colleagues and take a percentage of the payout. Junior attendants who resisted were bullied, given the worst duties, and threatened with negative performance reviews that could stall their careers. Tiffany, the junior attendant from Flight 772, tearfully confessed that Brenda had demanded $10 from her for the privilege of working the less demanding business class section on their previous flight. Paul Fletcher compiled the findings into a thick dossier and presented it to Harrison in his penthouse office overlooking the City of London. The glass walls offered a panoramic view, but Harrison's focus was entirely on the damning report in his hands. "She wasn't just cruel," Harrison said, his voice low and seething as he read through the evidence of the eBay store. "She was a parasite. She built a mini fiefdom, Harrison." Paul said, his tone grim. "She exploited every loophole and intimidated anyone who might have spoken up. The incident with Ms. Morgan wasn't an aberration. It was her standard operating procedure. The only difference was that this time the CEO was watching." Harrison closed the folder, his jaw tight. The humiliation Avery had suffered now seemed even more sinister. It hadn't been a random act of spite. It was the anger of a predator whose prey had dared to ask for a free sample of something she was planning to illegally sell. "What are our options?" Harrison asked. "Legally, we have more than enough for termination with cause, obviously," Paul replied. We can also pursue criminal charges. Theft, fraud. It's a strong case. The paper trail is impeccable." Harrison stared out the window at the planes, streaking across the sky in the distance. Each one was a testament to his family's legacy, a legacy built on engineering innovation, and he had always hoped integrity. Brenda Davies had made a mockery of all of it. "We press charges," Harrison said, his decision absolute. "All of them. I want this prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and I want a memo sent out to all 20,000 employees of this company. I want them to know what she did, how she did it, and what the consequences are. We're going to use this as a scalpel to cut this behavior out of our organization for good. No more isolated incidents, no more missed patterns. This ends now." He then picked up his phone. He had one more call to make. Avery answered on the second ring. She had spent the last 2 days in a state of bewildered transition, staying in the guest suite of a hotel Harrison had arranged for her. "Avery," he said, his voice losing its hard edge. "It's Harrison. The investigation into the flight attendant is complete. It's worse than we thought." He proceeded to tell her everything, not just about the rudeness, but about the systemic theft, the scams, the intimidation. As she listened, Avery's initial feeling of personal humiliation transformed into a cold anger on behalf of all the other faceless passengers who had been exploited by Brenda. Her own incident was no longer just a personal slight. It was the catalyst that had exposed a deep-seated corruption. "My God, Harrison," she said when he finished, "that's monstrous." "It is," he agreed, "and we are taking legal action. But I wanted to tell you personally, because you weren't just a victim of her bad mood. You were the person who unknowingly stood up to a criminal and brought the whole rotten structure crashing down." In that moment, Avery's perspective on the event shifted entirely. She wasn't the woman who was laughed at for wanting a pillow. She was the woman who had, by simply asking for a small bit of decency, become an accidental instrument of justice. The hard karma that had hit Brenda Davies wasn't just a sudden fall. It was a complete and total unraveling, a consequence she had been building for herself, piece by stolen piece, for 15 years. A week later, the story of Brenda Davies' spectacular downfall was old news within Aura Airlines, replaced by the stark reality of the new company-wide policies Harrison had implemented in its wake. The memo he sent out was a masterclass in corporate communication, unflinching, detailed, and absolute. It laid bare Brenda's schemes, announced the criminal charges, and introduced a new anonymous whistleblower system, managed by an independent third party. The message was clear: the age of looking the other way was over. For Avery, the past week had been a whirlwind. Harrison had insisted she stay in London at the airline's expense, arguing that she deserved time to decompress and strategize her next move. They had met every day initially, under the pretense of keeping her updated on the investigation. But their conversations quickly evolved. They talked for hours, sitting in quiet cafes or walking through Hyde Park. He learned about the nuances of her vision for Viridian Designs, not just as a business, but as a philosophy. She spoke of architecture that breathes of corporate headquarters, that generate more energy than they consume, of living spaces that promote mental well-being. He was captivated not just by her ideas, but by the fierce intelligence and resilience that lay beneath her quiet exterior. She in turn learned about the man behind the CEO title. She heard about the immense pressure of upholding his father's legacy while forging his own, his frustrations with the impersonal nature of a massive corporation, and his deep-seated, almost obsessive desire to make Aura Airlines a symbol of quality and respect. She saw the ghost of the curious teenager in the factory, the one who had pestered her father with questions, now grown into a man who carried the weight of the entire enterprise on his shoulders. One crisp afternoon, Harrison took her to Aura's corporate headquarters. It was a sleek, modern glass tower, but inside Avery noted the stale, generic design of the offices. "This is what I wanted to talk to you about," Harrison said, gesturing around the vast, uninspired lobby. "Your pitch in New York may have failed, but I want to hear it." For the next 2 hours in the main boardroom, Avery gave the presentation of her life. There were no stone-faced venture capitalists this time, just Harrison listening with an intensity that made her feel more seen than she ever had before. She laid out her blueprints, her cost-benefit analyses of green technology, her vision for a new kind of corporate spambasel. When she finished, Harrison was silent for a long time, looking at the schematics projected on the screen. "The men you pitched to in New York were fools," he said finally, his voice full of conviction. "They were looking for a quick return. They weren't looking at the future. I am." He stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the city below. "Avery Aura Airlines is about to undertake its biggest ground expansion ever. A new crew training facility in Virginia, a state-of-the-art logistics hub near Frankfurt, and a complete redesign of our executive terminals in New York and London." He turned back to her, his grey eyes shining with an idea. "This is a multi-hundred-million-dollar project. The architectural firms bidding for it are the biggest in the world. But their designs are all the same. Glass, steel, and zero soul. They don't reflect the brand I want to build." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle in the room. "I don't want to give this contract to them. I want to give it to you." Avery stared at him, her mind struggling to catch up. "Me Harrison Viridian Designs doesn't exist anymore. I'm just me. I don't have the resources, the staff." "I'll give you the resources," he countered, stepping towards her. "I will personally fund the relaunch of your firm. Consider it a seed investment from Aura's new venture capital wing, which I am creating for this exact purpose. You will have your own team, your own budget, and a client who shares your vision. This isn't charity, Avery. I listened to you talk about your father's work, how the most elegant solution is the most efficient. I believe that. Your designs aren't just beautiful. They're smart. They will save us millions in energy costs over the long term. This is the best business decision I could possibly make." It was an offer that was as audacious and life-altering as his announcement on the plane. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was giving her back her dream, bigger and brighter than it had ever been before. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Yes," she whispered, a laugh bubbling up with the word. "Yes, absolutely. Yes." Their professional relationship was sealed in that moment. But as they stood there in the boardroom, a blueprint for the future glowing on the screen behind them, they both knew it was something more. The connection forged at 37,000 feet, born from humiliation and vindication, had become a foundation. He hadn't called her his wife to save her from a flight attendant. He had, in the strangest way imaginable, been speaking a different kind of truth into existence. He was claiming a partner, a woman whose intelligence he respected, whose resilience he admired, and whose past was inextricably linked with his own. The flight from New York had started as a journey of failure and retreat for Avery Morgan. But it had ended here, in a London boardroom, with a new beginning taking flight, a partnership that would not only redesign buildings, but also rebuild two lives, And that's how a simple request for a pillow unraveled a web of corruption and forged an unbreakable bond. It's a powerful reminder that our smallest actions can have the largest consequences, and that true karma, when it arrives, can be as swift and just as it is unexpected. Avery's story shows us that dignity is not determined by the class of your ticket, but by the content of your character. And Harrison's actions prove that true leadership isn't just about running a company, it's about defending the humanity within it. What started as a moment of deep humiliation became a testament to resilience, integrity, and the incredible ways the universe can bring two people together. If this story of justice and second chances moved you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas and incredible stories of karma. Click that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening.